Good evening. My name is Richard Hanley. I am the director of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center, and I apologize for this fiasco. This was supposed to be an in-person event, and if you like irony, it was an in-person event sponsored by Con Edison, who was providing the food and the wine and the refreshments, but not the cookies. My wife did that. And so, however, I don't know, maybe they didn't want to spring for the food and the wine because we don't have any. I managed to cancel the order this morning. At any rate, the reason, as near as I can determine from my speaking to people in security at the college, is that a transformer that sends power to the building, the brand new building at City Tech, blew and lost its power, and therefore they closed the building for the day and the evening. And as far as I know, the power is still not back on. So that's what I woke up to this morning when I turned on my phone and saw, well, there we go. And Alec and Reef and I were feverishly trying to determine what to do and how to do it. And so here we are. And thank you all very much for coming via Zoom. And what I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists who are here, and we are going to, this is the order in which I introduce them is the order in which they will speak. We have first with us Cecilia Kushner, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Prior to that role, she spent over a decade working for the city on a range of infrastructure, transit operations, land use, and community development programs. Most recently, she was Executive Vice President for Planning in New York City Ferry at the EDC. And earlier, which is when I think we met, Cecilia, you worked at the Department of City Planning in Brooklyn and then resiliency, and finally in the executive offices. Celia immigrated to the United States from France in 2005. She attended, before she left, the Sorbonne, then I guess the Bartlett School of Planning at UCL, and she wound up with a degree in city planning from CUNY's own Hunter College. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and two children. Jon Carbajal is NineDot's Senior Director of Product Development. He's led technical and commercial design, battery storage projects located throughout New York. He's expanding his application of outdoor stationary storage systems to also adding business models such as developing V2G systems. He's a trained energy engineer, having earned a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Cornell and an MS in sustainability management from Columbia. Shannon Dulaney is the Director of Public Affairs at itselectric, an urbanist with a decade-long commitment to sustainable transport. itselectric has led the community in partnership with, before that, she was at Spin, a shared micro-mobility company. She worked as a federal lobbyist for Honda, and she holds a dual master's degree from the Yale School of Management and the Yale School of Environment. Alec, who's recently joined us, is the Director of Product at Thalo Labs. Thalo Labs' real-world solutions combine proprietary sensing software and capture systems to bring tools previously reserved only for utility scale power plants, buildings everywhere. Before going into climate work, Alec was the VP of Product Engineering for Growth at Dotdash Management, where he transformed an aging media company into the world's largest digital and print publisher. Outside of work, he's a community builder, he's co-founder of Climate Tech Cities and Climate Film Festival. And someone knew him from his work on Climate Tech Cities, I guess, as the editor of a newsletter there. And Vince Wong is the co-founder and COO at ElectricFish, where he leads business-to-business sales, partnerships, and operations at ElectricFish. He has over a decade of experience in strategy and operations as a management consultant, an entrepreneur. I'm sorry, and I'm sure he is an entrepreneur, but an enterprise product marketer, a second-time founder, and he holds an MBA from Cornell Tech and a BA in International Relations from NYU. And so this event this evening is going to focus on something called the Innovation Post. Cecilia will tell us where it got its name. I don't know if it's apocryphal, but the one that I heard most recently was that it was a name cleverly invented by some developers who, when Amazon was trying to decide which city to locate in, they figured they'd get them to Brooklyn by, look at this map. We've got this waterfront here. It's an innovation coast. Come over here, Amazon. But Amazon didn't stay, but the name seems to have caught on. And so Cecilia will tell us, but all kinds of interesting things are being innovated along this coast, the coast of the Brooklyn waterfront, which of course is our ring. So without further ado, Celia, the floor is yours. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, one more thing, folks. We do have a chat function. Say hello to friends and family who happen to be on. You may do that and see who's here. You also can save your questions, type your questions into the Q&A, and we will answer questions at the end of the presentations. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Richard. Just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen.
Okay, if it could be, maybe if it's, can you?
I think I'm full screen now.
You are full screen?
I am full screen on my screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm Cecilia Kushner. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Economic Development Corporation. We're the economic development arm of the City of New York, really focused on diversifying the city's economy, making sure that we are welcoming all sectors that we believe are going to create meaningful job over the next decade, developing their ecosystem, investing in their infrastructure. And so I'll give you a little bit of context for the Innovation Coast, the Harbor Climate Collaborative, and all of the projects that are happening in this geography to open this conversation. So glad to be here with many people that we talk to on a regular basis on the panel as well at EDC. So just kind of stepping back a little bit, the city is really investing in what we called future-focused innovation sectors. So sectors that we believe are going to grow over the next decade, are going to create good jobs for New Yorkers, and where we think New York City has a competitive advantage to be able to position itself in a global hub in this sector. So the first one, which is important, and those three sectors are equally important to the development of the Innovation Coast and the Harbor Collaborative. So the first one is the green economy. We have kind of nation-leading policy in New York City, and we have one of the most urban environments that there is in the nation, with already 130,000 New Yorkers working in the green economy. These are 21 subsectors that we've determined are actually directly contributing to decarbonization of the physical environment. And so our ambition is really to grow this job to 400,000 by 2040. And we think that New York City is really positioned to do that with a number of investments, all of which have been unveiled in the Green Economy Action Plan that Mayor Adams really released in February. The second sector we're really investing in is life science, which also we think has a lot of opportunities for further growth in New York City. We have about 1,000 companies, or we have 250 companies today. Is like our goal is that by 2040, we have 1,000 companies, 40,000 workers, and 10 million square feet of real estate. And this is a sector we're investing greatly in, both in real estate, in innovation, and in support of the workforce. And finally, the third one is tech. We are obviously a really large tech hub in New York City, with close to 370,000 people already working in these sectors. We think that both gaming and AI have a huge potential to grow tremendously in the coming 5 to 10 years in New York City. And so again, these are like the three sectors that we really believe are well positioned for our economy and for New Yorkers. A lot of these projects that we are investing in at EDC and throughout the city, some of them relate to these sectors and others are like more general redevelopment. It turns out all happening along the harbor. And so we are organizing them in what we call a Harbor of the Future framework, if you want, and I'll be speaking to a few of them, but we really think that we need to begin to orient ourselves not just in terms of a 5-borough economy, but actually the harbor and the waterfront is in itself an epicenter for innovation. It's now with NYC Ferry an epicenter for transit, and so a lot of the projects are orienting themselves on the waterfront as a place. And this is a really important idea for the city. So some of the big projects related to the innovation industries I discussed are like the Science Park and Research Campus, SPARK, which is an entire redevelopment of the Hunter College School of Nursing towards life science and public health. Obviously, the climate exchange on Governor's Island is a really important investment that the city is making. I'll be talking about our investment at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, both in piloting of green economy startups, itselectric being a really great partner of ours last year on this, but also the Brooklyn Navy Yard is similarly making a lot of investment towards the green economy. So this is the Green Economy Action Plan that I was discussing earlier. This is a first of its kind plan for the city and to really make strategic investments in growing the green economy. There are more than 60 actions. They're all focused on economic development, business growth, attraction, innovation, and workforce, to make sure that New Yorkers are really poised to enter into this space. Some of them are like really innovation studio, like we have a master timber studio. We're doing a lot of work on circular construction, but also some of them are more like real estate deals, really making sure that we're leveraging city-owned lands for EV charging and battery storage, for example, or offshore wind by building the biggest offshore wind port along the Sunset Park waterfront. But for us, the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which is an historic multi-million square feet building on the Sunset Park district, is a really important asset in this entire strategy. It is a very active asset, and we think because of its location in Sunset Park along the waterfront, close to the first offshore wind ports, and its mixture of existing industrial tenants and capacity to really take in more innovation and startup, that it can really be an incredible center for the green economy moving forward. So we have a really important request for proposal that's been out since, I think, late February or early March at the Brooklyn Army Terminal for what we call a climate innovation hub. That would be a center about 100,000 square feet for which we are dedicating 100 million to build. That will have an operator, and the goal of this operator that we believe is probably going to be a consortium of organization, is to operate a cutting-edge facility dedicated to the green economy and innovation in the green economy, really supporting startups, especially startups that are hardware startups that actually need to try and pilot and make noise in a building to be able to see if their technology is actually fruitful and commercialable in an actual city and built environment with waterfront and with a lot of outdoor space for piloting as well. And so part of this entire enterprise for us has been the creation of what we call Pilots at Bats in September, where we are welcoming startups, many of them are green economy startups, to try their technology on the BAT campus, which are both the buildings, the waterfront, and the area around the buildings themselves. And so these BAT investments is really part of what we're calling a Harbor Climate Collaborative, which is an active working group between EDC and the Sunset Park and our Sunset Park portfolio, the Governor's Islands leadership, and the climate exchange leadership and the huge investment that they're making on Governor's Island, and Brooklyn Navy Yard and their long-term commitment to industrial jobs and to innovation. And so these three groups, we are meeting on a very regular basis to align around piloting opportunity, regulatory coordination that needs to happen with DOB, with FDNY to make many of the green economy technologies actually legal or at scale, but also looking at like tenants and where we are best situated to support them in our different campuses, as well as general kind of ecosystem building and partnership. And so we really see these trifecta of mission-driven organization with strong, well-positioned real estate in the East River, all dedicated to the green economy. It's kind of an epicenter in like the harbor of the future that will continue to develop with a series of key projects dedicated to the future of New York City's economy, centered around the city leveraging its real estate to do so. So that is the context of what we are trying to do, which is a piece of work that has started, you know, way back when there were just beginning of conversation of being able to like reestablish the waterfront in New York City as an important driver of New York City's economy with the investment in the New York City ferry. And that's like very much alive and continuing in this administration with a focus on the innovation economy for New York City. So that's it. That's my intro to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. That sets a great context. I should say that the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center has been around for a while, and we've seen all of this grow. We've seen it all happen, just as we've seen your career projecting, which is very, very good indeed. And now we're going to see and hear from some people who are doing this green economy and making these things happen. And so the first person will be Jon Carbajal, excuse me, from NineDot, and he will tell us about NineDot Energy.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Yeah, my name's Jon, and I'm here with NineDot today. So I will talk about some of the urban development that we're doing, hopefully coming to a waterfront near you soon. But first, let me give you guys a little intro on NineDot Energy. So NineDot Energy, we're actually a startup that, I guess 2 years ago, it was only 4 people, working in Brooklyn, New York. I'm calling you guys today from NYU Metro Tech campus. We're part of an incubator at the Urban Future Lab. But now we're about 55 employees strong, New York City based, Brooklyn centric, and we're focused on building urban community scale energy storage projects. And so we have a pipeline to build 400 megawatts and beyond of distributed community storage projects. And so unlike maybe small residential communities, small residential storage that might back up a single home or building, community storage is actually connected to like the distribution system, Con Ed feeders and kind of serve many buildings. And I'll talk more about those differences later. But there's a lot of benefits, but ultimately it's kind of making the grid more reliable and bringing monetary value to the community through subscriber discounts and and helping us electrify. This is an example of like what a project looks like. So we actually build assets. We're really kind of like a real estate developer where our asset class is energy storage or other renewable energy infrastructure. And so we take underutilized parcels of land. They could be weird shapes, more industrial, manufacturing areas, rear yards, just underutilized outdoor area in relatively small amounts, anywhere from a few thousand square feet up to 10,000 square feet. And we build these power hubs that will trickle charge overnight from Con Ed power. And then in hot summer days or cold winter afternoons, these batteries are discharging stored power back to Con Ed, helping to kind of meet the needs of the community while also kind of being compensated through on-peak credits. And so this is kind of what it looks like. It's pretty innocuous. It's like not dissimilar from a building's substation where there's some switch gear and transformers on the right-hand side here. And on the left-hand side are an array of battery packs, kind of the same type of batteries that go into electric vehicles or in your cell phone, or the same battery in the laptop that I'm calling you from. And also, in the rear world, when there's extra space, we always put solar modules in these setback areas because there's some benefits there. And again, this is a little bit of the construction process where we do a little bit of excavation. We elevate the batteries if needed, especially if there's a floodplain, and I think that's more relevant in a waterfront setting. And ultimately, we're working with a landlord, a property owner, to either buy or lease the land to help them improve the property value, while also having tenants, on the property or in the same kind of community or kind of network benefit from the availability of credits and likelihood of that feeder being more resilient. So, okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about community storage. And I think a lot of people might be familiar with community solar, but not so much storage. And I think storage is a lot more relevant for New York City because it's going to play a larger role because we have a lot of offshore wind, upstate solar coming in line, more decreasing availability of traditional thermal and nuclear plants. So having that flexibility to kind of match supply and demand, it really matters with storage, and we can fit a lot of storage in New York City, unlike solar or offshore wind or onshore wind. And so storage really strikes this balance between economies of scale and also buildability when you have it at the community scale. So behind the meter storage, that's typically a power wall you might see. That's could be 10 kilowatt hours, maybe a few megawatt hours at most. And the beneficiaries of that are like a household or single business. And the way that's interconnected is it's done on a meter by meter basis. And it can be kind of lengthy to have one building, one interconnection. And there might be some distributed benefits where the Con Ed grid is a little more resilient, less likely to have an outage like today. And I'll talk about utility scale storage, which I think is maybe more what developers typically do. And this could be a multi-year process, 5, 7, 10 plus years. The scale is a lot greater. Where 80 to 800 megawatt hours are being built. So that's there are economies of scale there. There's a lot of benefits to the grid. But the main beneficiary there is really the utility that's helping to procure more reliable power. There's a really complicated transmission interconnection that needs to be done, and you really don't get a lot of benefits to the distributed grid. So community scale storage, unlike, it kind of takes the best of both worlds, where we build in 4 to 20 megawatt hour chunks that can be built relatively quickly, and you actually get economies of scale where you're not doing a bespoke design for a single building or a household, where you kind of really have standardization, improve property values, and every project that gets built, we have to take on hundreds or thousands of subscribers that will be able to offtake that electricity, and those, are Con Ed customers. And then there are, of course, grid benefits that happen. So, if Con Ed needs emergency power, a lot of times these assets are contracted to help deliver that. So let me go on to the next slide. So NineDot, we're a New York City company, urban developer. This is a little bit of a heat map in terms of the clusters of areas where we're developing projects. We like to say we're in all 4 boroughs, except Manhattan, where property value is so expensive. And we're kind of increasingly looking at more waterfront properties, but nothing yet there. But we see a lot of value in kind of co-locating battery storage, especially with industrial waterfront developments. And also definitely we're co-locating EV charging with our battery storage. When you're building a big beefy service to have a battery trickle charge overnight and then discharge in hot summer days, there's a lot of available capacity for EV charging. And we have an announced partnership with Revel, where we kind of developed the first of its kind bi-directional vehicle to grid chargers at one of their charging depots. So this is going to be our 3rd season this summer, where those vehicles are going to be discharging back to Con Ed grid during peak summer hours. And yeah, we're increasingly using the remnant space at our battery sites to also enable EV charging. Yeah, and then just talking about the New York City story a bit, where there's a lot of investment in community solar. And that's been tremendous. New York State has built more than almost 2 gigawatts worth of distributed solar, and that's at 5 megawatts at a time. And so those numbers really add up. But when you look at where that's being built, community solar on the right here, this right bar graph, most of that community solar is being built in non-metropolitan areas, upstate. So that's kind of where land is available, and you can build on 25, 50 acres at a time to build solar. So the beneficiaries of those are more rural New Yorkers. But on the left here, when you look at where New Yorkers live, most of them actually live downstate, more than half in the New York City area, but they actually don't have any kind of community solar available to them. But we see community storage actually being a really viable solution for the downstate population. So there's kind of an energy equity component here. So we like this visual where what you see here are both 5 megawatts of renewable energy. So in the gold area, that's a 5 megawatt community solar farm upstate. That's about 25 acres of space that's being occupied. And similarly, similar power, similar dollar value asset, a 5 megawatt battery storage system. It's much more compact, and it fits in a quarter of an acre. So 2 orders of magnitude smaller. And so we see community storage as really being an urban solution that charges from offshore wind and upstate solar, and then kind of re-releases those off-peak renewable energy, into on-peak needs of the grid. So we'll talk more about it later. And yeah, and of course, we can't do it alone. So we have a lot of partners, from landowners, whether private or public, the subscribers that buy the energy, of course, regulators, policymakers, and so on. So I know I'm at the end of 10 minutes, but just kind of in wrapping up, we're just kind of recognizing that there's a lot of synergies for waterfront development, for potentially adjacent loads can use the reserve power in the battery to back up in a resiliency situation, maybe in a situation like today where the transformer that serves that campus blows, and for temporarily there could be battery power available to it. And then, yeah, there's kind of flood proofing designs that can help make sure the battery is up and running even when maybe other assets are swamped. So that's something we're continuing to explore. And then I think maybe for more discussion, but the Brooklyn Navy Yard will be home to one of the first battery barges in New York City. This is kind of going not by us, but by others on a much larger scale. It's a 300 megawatt plant that's kind of being designed for the Navy Yard. It's going through. It's been 10 plus years in development. You can kind of follow a lot of the Department of State and the different Army Corps of Engineer reviews of that plan. that started as a thermal plant, but battery storage has less point emissions that can kind of really help meet transmission level needs of the community. And maybe this could be complemented by more distributed, upland or offshore battery storage, at a kind of community scale level that can be deployed in less than 10 years. Yep, and that's all I have to say. So happy to talk more and give the rest of the panel and other attendees a perspective of an urban battery storage developer. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, John. So am I to expect that you'll be knocking on the door of my college president saying, hey, you messed up that conference, that evening talk last week, that parking lot in back that only the deans can get to use and not the faculty or students. Why don't you put it to better use? But I'm just suggesting, just saying. Yeah. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Shannon, who is going to talk about It's Electric.
Thanks so much. And yes, I'm Shannon Dulaney. I'm Director of Public Affairs for It's Electric. We are curbside EV charging, purpose-built for cities. And so I just have this one slide to talk through, but I wanted to also just talk about our relationship with EDC and how important the Brooklyn Innovation Coast has been to our development. We were launched in 2021, and it's really because our founders, Nathan King and Tia Gordon, are longtime Brooklyn residents, and they looked into getting an EV during the pandemic. They wanted to get a car for the very first time, and they realized that they really couldn't get an EV because they didn't have a dedicated parking space. They didn't have a garage or a driveway, which is an experience that 1 million New York drivers share, very common. And they didn't have a place that was nearby where they could reliably charge their car. They were going to have to pay for a garage spot, and it was over 1 mile away. And with their background in architecture and urban design, they really looked at what we already have in terms of our assets in cities, which is a lot of buildings. And what's really great about those buildings is that they often have spare electrical capacity. So their big innovation is that they partner with property owners and pull the power from their electrical panel out to the curb. And that's what you see on the screen here is just kind of a curb cut. They do a shallow trench from that electrical panel and pull that power out to the curb. And then there's a publicly available EV charging station for the entire community to use. These are level 2 charging stations, so they will charge your average EV in an overnight, and that's really what we're trying to do at It's Electric is switch the public EV charging experience from something where you are doing it as an opportunity or having to do that destination charging, having to go somewhere to charge, and instead try to mimic what people who do have garages and driveways already do, which when they pull into their driveway at night, they just plug in their car. They don't have to worry about it. They wake up to that full battery. So we are trying to have the electric vehicle charging network be ubiquitous. And what's really important about that is in addition to solving the power problem and really addressing the grid capacity issues and sidestepping that utility connection that most EV charging stations have to do today through this behind the meter connection. In addition, we have a really different hardware configuration. So it's a 7-inch by 7-inch and 44 inches tall, so very slim, small footprint. And we are the first company in the United States to be certified with a detachable cord configuration. Now, we're not the first company to do this worldwide. This is a very common configuration in Europe and the UK. But instead of having the cord, which adds a lot of bulk to the charger itself and causes problems in terms of reliability, since the cord is the #1 thing that breaks, instead of having the cord on the charger itself, the cord lives in the car with the driver. And another really big important aspect to this and real benefit that we see is that it helps in terms of future proofing. So instead of having to make a decision of if it's going to charge a Tesla or if it's going to charge the rest of the cars, or increasingly as the standards migrate to the NACS standard or the Tesla standard, we don't have to make that decision. We can give drivers the cord that works for their vehicle and not worry about making that investment and having it be, obsolete in just a few years. So those are the two big innovations, the behind the meter connection and the detachable cord. I'll also say that we work with property owners to give them 20% of the revenue that is generated by the chargers. So we really do see ourselves as a community EV charging solution, really creating a lot of stakeholders in the transition to EVs. Our relationship with EDC has been wonderful. We were one of the first companies to pilot our solution at the Brooklyn Army Terminal that Cecilia was talking about. And that was our very first installation of our charger before it had even gotten through the certification process. So really ground truth our claim that we were able to do the installation in 2 days. And that was something that we were able to do right out the box. We have continued to work throughout the Innovation Coast. We are headquartered at the new lab, which is at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And then we have 3 of our market-ready products installed at Steiner Studios, which is a tenant in the Brooklyn Navy Yard as well. And they are our first revenue generating chargers, which is a really big milestone that we just hit in March of this year. So we are definitely Brooklyn focused and aimed at serving the Brooklyn community and New Yorkers in general, but we are certainly trying to use this as a jumping off point. We are really excited to be selected by the city of Boston to deploy 225 chargers there over the next 5 years through a competitive bid process. And then we also were awarded a federal grant to deploy chargers across 4 cities through their Ride and Drive Electric program, which was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, but truly would not have been able to win either of those bids and a lot of other contracts that I can't yet talk about just until we were able to really have the prototype validated through our relationships with EDC and through all of the relationships that we've been able to generate here in Brooklyn. I'll also just say, we know I'm friends with all these panelists, but specifically with NineDot, we've been, talking with them about partnership opportunities and, bringing our user also, again, relationships that because we're in the same sort of ecosystem, because we are all, going to the same events and in the same spaces, really allows for business development opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise. So really excited to be here tonight and answer any questions later on. I might have gone quicker than Richard was intending.
I'm sorry. I just pressed the wrong button on my computer and I got today's news so in front of me. So, and I lost my unmute button. Thank you very much for that. And I wonder, are you ever going to be in competition with restaurants and their sidewalk sheds? As will the city Department of Planning have to do some accounting for sharing that curb? As I'm looking and thinking, I know last year there was the reason why I say this. Last year's our conference was on hospitality and along the waterfront, and that was the big topic about the sheds and were they going to be made permanent and the space that they took up, the curbs and the residents and the parking spaces, but also I would imagine these charging stations. So that's what it is to be in a city. It's contestation and things win out one way or another. So now we'll turn to Alec Turnbull, who will talk about Thalo Labs and what they do. So Alec, please.
Continuing on the decline of slides here, I'm afraid I have none, so I'll just speak about Thalo. We are based in the Brooklyn Navy Yard on our innovation coast here. We're in building 77, which I refer to as the Russ and Daughters building. And we are also members of New Lab. So we hop over there, we use their fab equipment, and have also piloted with the Brooklyn Navy Yard for a couple of our projects. We're a hardware company. We're a building decarbonization company, very proudly New York based, responding in part to Local Law 97, a landmark decarbonization law here in New York, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, if not all of you, which sets one of the highest prices on carbon in the nation for building decarb with escalating ramps. The buildings have done fairly well so far. 90% meet the next bar, and it will start to ramp up and get more and more strict in 2030. So moving towards that. What we build at Thalo are really hardware solutions that enable software to fill in the missing links of building decarbonization. And so we're focused on a few things that aren't really being measured right now. We focus on methane mitigation in buildings. So we've built a continuous emissions monitor. It works on any combusting asset, anything that burns gas, fuel oil. Those might be water boilers, furnaces. Some chillers use these. There are a number of things that burn gas in the built environment in New York. So many, in fact, that they make up 70% of New York City's emissions. While electrification is certainly the best and kind of long run solution to all of this, in the meantime, what we're doing is making sure that at least the things that we have are running correctly and aren't just leaking methane into the atmosphere or operating inefficiently in a way that burns more fuel than needed. So what we do is we've brought power plant level technology down to these machines, measure what's coming out in terms of air quality, methane, volatile organic compounds, ozone, and generally get a sense of what's going on in that black box. Using that data, on-site engineers or contractors can come in and adjust, tune, repair the boiler, fix those methane leaks, and reduce the on-site emissions while improving efficiency. Similarly, we have a few new products that we've been developing that are also kind of shared in spirit. One is around refrigerant, another sort of, I don't want to say forgotten greenhouse gas, but a greenhouse gas that is less in the focus than CO2, but refrigerant has up to thousands of times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. Methane's about 80 times on a 20-year time frame. And so reducing refrigerant leaks is actually really impactful and really important. And it's not something that people are really monitoring for right now. Currently, it's being reported on essentially based off of how often you have to refill your refrigerant. So we have a solution that hooks up to chillers and detects changes in efficiency in order to provide early leak detection and prevent an enormous amount of that refrigerant leaking out. We also provide data solutions around metering across all meters. We've got a little device that will read pretty much any meter and turn it into a smart meter that you have access to immediately. Getting utility data can be time consuming and often comes in a delayed cadence and comes on kind of a monthly cadence as opposed to real time monitoring. So this hooks in with BMS systems and is a little device that sits on your meter and reads it for you, whether that's water, gas, or electric. And then finally, because we can't help ourselves and we love building new devices and new hardware, we also build direct air capture systems that work within the built environment. As with our other hardware devices, these take advantage of existing infrastructure. So we are trying to do carbon capture by using the existing infrastructure of New York City and of skyscrapers. So why go out and build big racks of fans in the middle of nowhere when you can actually use existing HVAC systems and existing buildings which concentrate CO2 So if you've ever been in a busy meeting room, you've been in a stuffy box that starts to fill up with CO2, not as a net additive to the atmosphere, but just by virtue of people breathing out. We have HVAC systems that ventilate that out, but the fact that it's concentrated to 3 or 4 times outdoor air makes it all that much more efficient for us to capture it indoors. So we have small little units, they fit inside doors, they plug into the wall, they're modular, and they can filter carbon dioxide within a building using that existing HVAC system. We've deployed these in a number of places across New York City. You can see one at New Lab. And the outcome of that are rocks. So we get solid sorbent rather than liquefied CO2. And using that, we put it back into the built environment. So it can go in as drywall filler or concrete filler. We've been working with a number of major real estate companies here in the city. Very happy to, and happy to announce we actually are just included in a couple of their sustainability reports, so we can be a little bit more public about it. I'm working with Vornado and ESRT, the Empire State Realty Trust, to bring our technology to their buildings, as well as a number of other areas. So at Thalo, we're really, again, hardware and software enabled platform for filling in these missing links of building decarbonization. And within the innovation coast, such as it is, really take advantage of being in New York, really do appreciate, and I don't know where we could do it other than the Navy Yard, maybe Brooklyn Armory Terminal. We've looked into pilot programs there. But it has been an incredible place to be. And I think half our team takes the ferry to work. So there's that too, which is just very scenic and always great. So happy to answer any more questions and hand it off.
Thank you, Alec. That was good presentation. And now those devices for measuring the meters or giving meter, those are for individual, or it's always going to be multifamily or large scale buildings, or?
Almost all of our products are really targeted at least multifamily. We do multifamily commercial. We've installed, we're working with a financial services company, and we've installed a number of their smaller bank branches, so sort of standalone commercial buildings. It doesn't really make sense at the single home level or the residential level. It's just...
Thank you. Vince.
Great. Thanks for having me today. Really inspired by all the tremendous work my co-panelists are working on, and happy to share a bit about what we're working on as well. So I'm just going to present my single slide as well, and we can take it from there. Alrighty. So ElectricFish, we are a climate tech startup that was founded around 4.5 years ago at a hackathon, very cliche, in San Francisco. And our goal is to ultimately usher in a decarbonized, resilient, and equitable future for the energy transition, specifically within the context of electrification. We are, all minority founded, 4 founders from 4 different nations, and we're really proud of not only the diversity of our team, but also the global ambition of what we're hoping to do. And there's really been no place better than New York City that really exemplifies the tremendous vision that we have. But a little bit about the technology. We are working on systems that, as we've seen from the panel, building infrastructure is really hard, but it's also really fun. And we are approaching this as well from a hardware and software perspective. And so we are building fast electric vehicle chargers, faster than a Tesla supercharger, that's able to be deployed in a matter of weeks instead of what is typically multi-years process, using a site's existing grid infrastructure. Because these systems are also coupled with battery storage, we're also able to provide, through our unique software integration, backup power to sites. And so this is a very flexible energy asset that can be very easily deployed or redeployed with little notice. Being able to tap into sites that, again, typically don't have a lot of power availability, and the prospect of asking Con Edison to deploy significant grid capacity is usually non-starter. We're seeing that, there's a lot of pockets of the city that, really were planned maybe decades ago, and the grid infrastructure modernization is certainly happening. But we're expecting to see that's, going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, optimistically. And this is not unique to Con Edison. This is really many utilities across the country. Con Edison's actually, I would say, on the leading edge in terms of piloting and integrating new technologies. But it is a very non-trivial challenge as a utility to plan what the next era of this electric grid looks like. As we think about grid infrastructure, traditionally it's very centralized. We have these massive assets that are able to, whether through solar, natural gas, or other methods, basically produce the amount of output that we need. But with increasing demand all across the board, and just increasing threats from climate change, it's this kind of pernicious cycle where we're trying to deploy technologies that will help us solve climate change while also being confronted by climate change, which slows down some of those efforts. And so we're seeing a desire amongst utilities like Con Ed to increasingly leverage distributed approaches. So rather than everything be deployed in one very central area, have technologies that are also closer to the end customers. And so more decentralized, more distributed deployment of infrastructure. And to the extent possible, once we have these very important technologies deployed, how can we ensure that they themselves are resilient against the very threats that we're trying to address, like grid outages and hurricanes and blizzards? So ElectricFish, we're a California-based company, but I myself, as Richard explained, have New York in my DNA. Went to NYU and then Cornell Tech. Spent 11 years in the city before moving to California a couple of years ago. Today, though, I am calling from Chinatown, and I can see Governor's Island and the Brooklyn Bridge from this literal seat. So it's always a pleasure to be back. And as we were thinking about where to demonstrate a very important technology, we definitely had a lot of different entities, organizations that were trying to solicit us to participate. And this was about 2 years ago. But we really found this unique opportunity with NYC EDC, New Lab, and Con Edison through the New Lab Resilient Energy Studio. It was a phenomenal program that we're just wrapping up now, where context is, New York City is trying to advance energy storage technologies in a more urban context, which is traditionally quite difficult. But, with the sheer willpower and determination of EDC and the partners, they actually put together a really well thought out program, which we were very lucky to be part of. And so through that partnership and that program, we gained membership at New Lab at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We also had the opportunity to connect with Floyd Bennett Field. So for those of you who don't know Floyd Bennett Field, it's technically under national jurisdiction through the National Park Service, but it's in South Brooklyn just before you cross the bridge into the Rockaways in Queens. And it was actually New York's very first municipal airport, and was actually used as a naval air station during World War I to assist in our efforts and in the sort of global efforts. So it has a lot of storied history. Today, it's a very thriving recreational area for bird watchers, archery. I do see a lot of people practicing their driving there, as the streets are very wide and generous. But I will also say that there was a tremendous opportunity to work with the National Park Service as well as the local partner, Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy, which administers the land on behalf of MPS. It's an area that is very well known for being a charging desert, just in general, South Brooklyn and the Rockaways. And additionally is an area very vulnerable to the threats of climate change. So as we think about power infrastructure at a site, things like street lights and just chargers and EVs are usually plagued by outages and are usually more susceptible to things like flooding, which can happen quite suddenly. And so we had the immense pleasure of partnering with our local pilot partners in deploying at Floyd Bennett Field. And so this is a still from the winter. We deployed it last July, and we're coming up on a year and ready to call it, a wraps on the full year pilot. But we had tremendous success in that this is a very ecologically sensitive area, where we were actually told between late March of last year and October, there's the very sensitive bird migration season. And if we were to do any construction during those periods, we simply would be disallowed. So one of the benefits of our system is that it requires very little infrastructure and can be deployed in a matter of days, which is what we had to do given how little advance notice we actually got about the bird migration season. But it all worked out really well and without a hitch. And we were able to not only deploy the system really easily, but also get our permits from Con Edison really easily because we're not requesting a very onerous grid connection. We're actually able to use a very lightweight, low voltage connection that is readily available. So we didn't need Con Ed to actually upgrade the service, which would have definitely stretched out our deployment timeline. And some of the keys, that we wanted to demonstrate at this pilot were not only, speed of deployment, which we, excelled at, but also the ability to not only fast charge EVs, but also provide backup power. And so I don't have it on this slide, but we were actually able to, we recently won a federal award from the Department of Homeland Security called Clean Power for Hours. And we demonstrated our ability to back up local streetlights and administrative buildings at this parking lot of Floyd Bennett Field for a couple of hours. And it's really this flexible sort of infrastructure that we see emerging as a trend for fleets, governments, and others that really value uptime and resilience of their infrastructure. And so, through this program, we were able to engage very closely with local stakeholders, present our work at New Lab. New Lab and EDC in particular have been really huge proponents of ours and just amplifying the work. We weren't able to make it in person, but I know It's Electric was able to attend when Mayor Adams announced the Green Economy Action Plan a couple of months ago. We were really honored to be featured on pages 44 to 45, in case anyone wants to follow up, of that plan, where we, have continued the just tremendous education with the public and community and government stakeholders about the work that we've done. And sort of looking ahead, we're really excited about the next generation of our system. So since this pilot, it's certainly got attention across the boroughs, the broader New York State and NYSERDA ecosystems and beyond. We've recently sold our first commercial system to a federal agency that will be deployed midsummer, and we're continuing to tap into our New York City ecosystem and networks, which are absolutely concentrated and centered at the Innovation Coast through the Navy Yard, and are really excited about the future opportunities to develop our technology and ultimately bring much needed climate tech infrastructure to New York. So with that, I'll cede it back to Richard.
Okay. Thank you, Vince, and thank you, everyone, for participating in this. And now I guess we could have some questions. So those in the audience, please feel free to use your Q&A. And we have a first question here. And I guess this is for Jon. There has been community pushback in New York, particularly on Staten Island, regarding battery energy storage systems. The pushback generally stems from fears of fires at the facilities. How has your team mitigated these community concerns?
That's a great question, and thank you. Yeah, so we at NineDot take safety as paramount. It's like one of the most important things And the battery storage systems that we're installing, you might have seen some of the photos. They have a lot of regulation and safety systems around them. And so these are not your typical e-bikes or hoverboards or kind of being haphazardly, plugged in and charged in different temperature environments. So it's a really kind of controlled system where temperature, voltage, is kept at safe levels, where there's remote monitoring. We actually plug directly into the FDNY central station monitoring. And the way we deal with fires is we operate this system and prevent, just to never let that happen. And there's a lot of prevention and mitigation there. So I think it's a really lengthy, multi-month, multi-year process where we kind of go through a permitting and safety system design. And and these are highly tested and certified products that we just are not prone to some of the same issues of combustion and flammability that you might have seen in some other horrible e-bike fires that are occurring. Yeah, so I guess the main thing that we're doing is just working with the community, the fire department. We're socializing the information, really with the firehouses and just exceeding all the safety standards. So that's kind of the short of it, and we can happy to talk much more offline. You can reach out to me.
Okay, thank you. I address this to Annie. In terms of resilience, New York, of course, was traumatized by Sandy a dozen years ago or so. And does that factor into your thoughts when you are looking at what it is you are making and designing accordingly and the like? Some of you touched upon this briefly in your talks, but does anybody have any more that they'd like to say about the resilience of the systems that you're working on or working to create resilience? Anyone?
I can jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think with EV charging, one of the things that, Vince mentioned briefly, or maybe it was actually John with the bidirectional charging with Revel, the bidirectional charging and having the car batteries serve as this distributed power source is something that is really promising. That technology is still not widespread. As John indicated, they are the first ones who are really looking at that bidirectional capacity. But what we at It's Electric think is that it's really important to make sure that that's not something that is just something that homeowners and people who have that at-home charging can take advantage of. So people who live in multifamily housing, who are renters, who park their cars on the street, they should be able to take advantage of those same sorts of, getting benefits from having Con Ed, pull power from their batteries and getting that same sort of benefit from making the switch to EVs. And it's also really important for communities that are going to be the most vulnerable to blackouts and brownouts and other sorts of grid interruptions, which typically tend to be our neighborhoods that are more reliant on multifamily housing. And so to help those communities make the switch to EVs and to have that distributed batteries in those neighborhoods is really important when you think about the sorts of extreme weather events where the grid might be down, and instead being able to take advantage of the power in your battery. This is also something where, not even from an economic perspective, but if you could be powering your home or powering your, and that's not necessarily in the It's Electric roadmap, but just in general, that bidirectionality is really important to helping provide that grid resilience, and something that we're thinking about in our product roadmap and how we're going to incorporate those technologies in future iterations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And here's a question for Cecilia. What do you see as the biggest remaining challenge to implementing the Green Economy Action Plan, and especially the growth of New York City's green economy? So what do
Sure.
you see remaining challenges?
Yeah, so there are a few they're not necessarily challenges, they're just things that would need to happen in order to realize this vision that the city is very much focused on. The first one that I really want to talk about, because we really didn't discuss it, is related to workforce. Like, in order to really get the decarbonization scale that we're talking about here, both like on the energy grid itself, but also on like realizing the purpose and the vision of Local Law 97, we're going to need a large number of New Yorkers that know how to use these technologies. And what we are up against is that a lot of these jobs are actually today held by an older generation of folks who entered into these professions, like being an electrician, for example, or working into like building management and maintenance, that we have not filled this pipeline over the last several decades. So and that's part of what we discussed in the Green Economy Action Plan, when we look at like the actual skilled workforce in deploying and maintaining these systems at scale. Many of them are meant to retire and exit the workforce in the next 15 to 20 years. So there really has to be a new generation of New Yorkers that are excited about entering these professions. And because the focus of the last 20 or 30 years has been so much into getting like a 4-year degree and more of an academic foresight into people's career, a lot of these like actual more skilled careers have not been invested in. And so there has to be a recalibration of this pipeline of New Yorkers entering into these jobs in order for us to really be able to meet the moment at scale. So that's kind of like one aspect of it that the city is really focused on. And that's part of why we tried to rebrand these jobs as green collar jobs, as opposed to blue collar jobs and how they were called for a really long time. These are actually New Yorkers and people that can enter into the new economy, even if they were be doing jobs that were considered like less valued jobs over the last decades from like the rest of the innovation economy. So that's one aspect of the challenge. That's like a big generational challenge, but it's a really exciting opportunity for New Yorkers. Another one is definitely regulation and regulatory changes. A big part of the resilience studio that was discussed about with New Lab is like working with FDNY to actually really trying to create safe, however, newer regulations surrounding battery storage and chemicals used in like batteries in general, so that we can get the type of innovation in technology that we need to see. We're in similar dialogue with the Department of Building around mass timber, for example, or like circular construction guidelines. So we have an entire regulatory framework that is not necessarily always conducive to new technology being able to be tried or deployed at scale. And so we have to find this right balance on the city side between safety and innovation. So I think like that's a really important piece of the puzzle that only government can solve. And then I think the third one is just really looking at capital access of new technology, and especially hardware companies have a really hard time sometimes to go from piloting an idea to being able to produce at scale and finding enough buyers of the technology that like allows the startup to survive sometimes the 2 or 3 years that it may take for like the regulatory framework to change, the permitting to be available, and the technology to be deployed. And so really trying on our side to make this timeline shorter, but also to see if there are things that we here or NYSERDA or the states or other actors can do. And the federal government has been like a brilliant kind of partner in this with all the bipartisan regulation can do to support like that moment of innovation, which is like, it's called the Valley of Death. It's a really hard moment for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of ideas, great ideas, like don't really get to like the full their full value for the economy or for decarbonization, because they're having a hard time moving past this issue of scale. So the city is really just trying to understand what is it that we can do to strike the right balance on all of these issues. European countries and some places, California, have also looked at these issues quite a lot. So we're learning a tremendous amount, kind of like globally, I think, because we're all looking at like the same goal, which is decarbonization and a greener future that creates jobs for people to participate in this economy. But I think these are some of the biggest issues.
Thank you. And by the way, just in what you said something now, does the EDC also, besides supporting by working with governments, but help the entrepreneurs who are in your various programs maneuver these or learn how to maneuver through the regulations and applications and the like?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the thing that we try to do as the Economic Development Corporation is be like a public-private partner. So bring together regulators, companies that have new ideas and new technology in a safe space where people can actually talk about innovation, and the regulators can really like learn what works, what doesn't, and like kind of take it in-house, which you don't, as a regulator, you don't always have opportunities for just conversations and to like look at innovation that is not like one where you have to give like a very strict response like really quickly. You're more on the compliance sides traditionally. And so, for example, the Resilience Studio that we have with New Lab is with FDNY. Or we have Mass Timber Studio, DOB is our partner. So like regulatory agencies are key partners of ours. And like what we're trying to do is just, again, facilitate a safe space for this conversation to take place. That really allows every party to participate in the creation of potentially a new regulatory framework.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Next question's for Vince. How difficult was it to get permission to use Floyd Bennett Field for your product? Can you talk about the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a couple of permits that we needed to secure. The first one was the site permit itself. Then there was the electrical permit. I would say for us, they were actually pretty smooth and seamless. And I think we owe a lot to certainly EDC and New Lab, but also Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy in helping us unblock. And just because ultimately it's federal land. So it works a little bit differently than if it was administered under the city. Even though it is in Brooklyn, it's still federal jurisdiction. And so MPS was the ultimate sort of permit authorizer, or AHJ, authority having jurisdiction. And so Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy helped us get a special use permit that would allow us to use the space. And it's a very similar permit that you might see for recreational purposes, funnily enough. It's a little arcane how some of the park regulations work, but we were able to get that pretty quickly, I would say, very, very early on in the process, like just 1 or 2 months in. And then that involved sort of just educating the superintendents that administer the Gateway National Recreation Area, of which Floyd Bennett Field is a part of. And that spans Staten Island, I think some of the coastal areas, and then even parts of New Jersey. But yeah, so that was the special use permit. And then with the electrical permit, Con Ed, was a sponsor, or is a sponsor of the Resilient Energy Studio. So from, right off the bat, we worked very closely with them in understanding how this would look like, even before we, started scoping. So that was super helpful. And we learned pretty quickly, that they have this basically interconnection threshold where if you're above a certain connection, it's going to require a full-on sort of site survey and grid upgrades. But if you're below, then you can basically, get by with a much less onerous permitting process, which they guarantee a 10 business day response time. And so because of the nature of our technology, which is high-powered fast charging, but that is able to work with low voltage connections, we were able to slot into that lower permit threshold. We didn't end up securing a permit to do bidirectional sort of energy export to this to the grid, but we did, as I mentioned, reserve a system for the ability to actually provide backup power bidirectionally to the site. So not the grid, but to the site, the local site's grid, if that's a helpful distinction. And but I think in the future, we would definitely want to pursue that other permit as well of being able to export energy bidirectionally. Hopefully that helps, and happy to elaborate further.
Okay, thank you. There's the next question. Actually, it's going to help me plug the BWRC's annual conference, which is in 10 days from now on offshore wind. And I invite you all to come to that full-day conference. It's going to be at the same building, and we are going to be able to serve some lunch and feed people. And maybe some of you can bring some of your products there just in case. So you'd be waiting outside, and if there's no electricity, to come to the rescues. Okay, so here's this question from one of the audience. Perhaps I missed this earlier. Apologies for coming in late. But how is the group anticipating the integration of increased offshore electrical infrastructure? And has there been anything noted about offshore storm surge, thinking specifically about projects like the Living Breakwater? And by the way, next week, Greg is the questioner. Make sure you come, and you could ask that question next week too. But for the current panel, there it is. There's that question.
Right.
And how's the group anticipating the integration of offshore electrical infrastructure, and has anything noted about offshore storm surge?
Right. But yeah, I'm happy to jump in for the first part with offshore wind. We're excited, even though we're not directly participating in offshore wind, to see many gigawatts of wind planned for South Brooklyn and other parts of the state. And New York City has to almost double our electricity peak capacity as we electrify everything from heat pumps and electric stoves and electric vehicles. And the thing with offshore wind, as we add more and more gigawatts of it, it's not dispatchable. It's going to give us a lot of energy. It's going to be inexpensive, but we see that being somewhat volatile. So, having flexible energy resources in the grid, energy storage, I can charge at night and mornings and nights when wind is blowing, but maybe not. We don't have a lot of demand. That makes sense. Having smart EV solutions, which I think others can talk about. It makes a lot of sense. So in anticipating that, we want to build several hundred megawatts of storage throughout the community of New York City. That's going to be eventually smarter and smarter to kind of synchronize when that system is charging, coincident with when offshore wind is blowing. And in terms of storm surges, I can't talk too much about that from climate adaptation, but doing environmental reviews when you're building battery storage or EV chargers, there's a lot of thought going into how we're designed to this not just the base floodplain elevation, but beyond that, and and kind of waterproofing vaults and building flood walls and elevating items. There's a lot of thought when you're building these assets, what's going to happen over the next 20, 40 years. But I think that's a whole other panel.
Okay, anybody else want to take a stab at that? Okay, come next week, Greg, to our conference. And the next question, I hope, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Celia, but I wonder, when you were talking about how important, the harbor is, and it's almost like New York City is going back to the water after generations of keeping people away from it. And I just remember when we met, you were starting to look at, the Brooklyn waterfront in particular then, and then you've had positions at New York City Ferry and where you are now looking at this. So do you see your career trajectory also like sort of paralleling New York City's this rediscovery and renewed romance with the water? And of course, that's favorite for us because we are, after all, the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center. So.
No, I mean, I think I'm just, I happen to be a planner working in New York for the last almost 20 years. And I think like what we've seen is like a huge renaissance around the waterfront. And I think an embrace despite Sandy, and I think like all the risk of New Yorkers for their waterfront. I think first is like more of an interest around recreation and housing. We've seen a lot of development on that front, but I think the last decade has really been around like the people working on the waterfront and like the working waterfront actually taking a new definition from a pure industrial to something that is really, I think, like for all of these projects and like a lot of what we're talking about, like the intersection of industrial manufacturing and innovation. And so I think it's an incredibly exciting time for New York to be in that space. And certainly just for us, like when we just look at like the Sunset Park waterfront district, which is 200 acres that EDC owns, and the BAT terminal being kind of like the center of it and the crown jewel of some of our assets, like just this area between the transformation at BAT, the inclusion of a new ferry stop, the offshore wind port with Equinor, a new mini campus. It's a tremendous amount of investment, all powered towards creating jobs for New Yorkers that are happening on the waterfront. And so it's an incredible transformation for New York, and I think we'll see a lot more of it coming down the pike.
Okay, someone comments, Shannon, about a book called Manhattan Beach. I love it. I love it. I love it. I know that. And the research that she did at the Brooklyn Navy Yard was quite impressive. And she spoke to some of the women who worked there in World War II before they died and had them recorded. So yes. And as someone who knows me puts down there Richard's favorite, it is one of my favorite books. And so do any of you have questions for each other? Questions in general about what you have heard from each other? Do you know each other? Is that is it a small enough community so that any question you had to ask them, you've asked them weeks ago? Is that how it works? Okay, I understand. I don't think I did understand that until now, but that's very good. So it is nice that this there is this interaction. One of the things, of course, well, I edited an academic journal called Journal of Urban Technology, and one of the articles that appear there is innovation and location and agglomeration, and those are the things, and scholars have been talked about it, but the agglomeration that is happening at the waterfront makes all of this innovation water related. And just from my position at this center, I just love to see that and see how it intersects. I think then, since our questions from our audience have been spent, our questions for each other weren't asked because they've all been asked already, and mine to you have also been answered. So I would just like to thank each and every one of you and our audience, those of you who came. I should mention that this evening's series of speakers on climate issues is sponsored by Con Edison. I want to mention that and recognize that it would have been a much better thing for them, I'm sure, if we were saying this after you were finishing, a nice canapé or a sip of wine, and then you say, thanks, Con Ed, rather than here we are with a Con Ed problem this morning, but it's not their fault, not the people who gave us the grant. We want more grants, so we love you, Con Ed, no matter what. Okay, so with that, I will sign off and thank everyone for coming, and thank you, audience, for your patience today. Bye now.
Thank you, Richard. Bye.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and this has
Thank
been
you, everyone.
recorded, and so we will have access to, there will be access to it. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.